Welcome to KOTN Late Night. Doug Lamarice, Bill Landis. Hey, Bill, what'd you do today, man? How you doing? Good to see you.
Oh, yeah, it's nice to see you too. No, nothing much. Went to a farmer's market, did a little crafting. Low key Saturday.
Talk ball for 7 hours and 44 minutes. If you guys didn't join us then, we did a watch along during the day for the first two windows of games, led by Ohio State, Penn State at noon, Oregon, Michigan at 3:30 Eastern, along with Iowa State in that window, Kansas State in that window. Someone called it a red wedding day for the North, Bill Landis, with some of the things that are happening. I don't know if it's quite that far, but just to reset, on a week when a bunch of teams had buys, we had number 3 Penn State losing to number 4 Ohio State. Number 7 Tennessee is in a game right now with Kentucky, and I guess we can wait until after the game is over for people to tell us whether Kentucky is good or not. Because when Kentucky beats Ole Miss or plays Georgia within a point, then Kentucky's good, and then when Kentucky is losing to Vanderbilt and Florida and every other weird random team in the SEC, then I guess they're not good. To be clear, this is 3-5 Kentucky. It's at Tennessee,
Neyland.
Right?
Yeah, in Neyland. Yeah.
Tennessee. And Kentucky is giving Tennessee everything it can handle, so that's up in the air. Also in distress is number 10 Texas A&M at South Carolina. They're down 30-20 in that game as we speak. Is that still correct? That they're in real trouble. Tennessee is at least still ahead. Texas A&M is on the ropes, brother.
That's 30-20, and I believe South Carolina is getting the ball back with about 5 or 6 minutes left.
Number 11 Iowa State lost. That's a northern team. Clemson's going to lose. I picked the wrong ACC upset. I thought Duke was going to beat Miami. Instead, Louisville is going to beat Clemson, and it's not particularly close. And Clemson was down like 26-7 and down 3 scores, and they were like, okay, we're not getting the end zone. I guess we'll kick the field goal here. And their field goal got blocked, and I thought Dabo Swinney was going to drop to his knees. So that's 33-14 with 3 minutes left. Clemson's going down. Number 17, K-State lost. Number 18, Pitt is getting throttled by SMU. And number 24, Illinois lost. So that is at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of the top 25 that are lost or are going to lose. And maybe 8 with Tennessee. Wow. This is after you and Ari and I on Wednesday kind of ran through all the playoff things and said, man, it's going to be hard for the committee. This is the chaos day. There often is a chaos day in college football, and there are a lot of teams off this week, right? Notre Dame's sitting at home this week. LSU and Alabama are sitting at home this week. Colorado's sitting at home this week. This is a good BYU's sitting at home. This is a good week to be sitting at home because it got a little wild, but that's the sport, man.
Yeah, I don't know that any one of us were naive enough to believe that a day like this wasn't going to happen, right? And honestly, if you look at some of those games, maybe the Kansas State one, I think, is mildly surprising. I kind of viewed the Iowa State and Texas Tech as a little bit of a spot there based off some matchups. This Pitt game certainly was a spot, and it's not, I think it's not so much a spot when you get beat as bad as Pitt's getting beat right now, but they just kind of got their doors blown off early by SMU, who just scored another touchdown. So I think you'd like to see Pitt maybe show up to be a little more competitive in this game than it has been, but I don't know if any of the individual results are entirely shocking based off how like an Iowa State or Kansas State has played this year. But yeah, it is a bit of punches a little bit of a hole in the balloon if you were looking for especially like I don't know. It's not that the 12 team or two Big 12 team dream is dead necessarily, but I think it took a little bit of a hit today for sure.
Yeah, but this really, as much as there were some teams getting wiped out, I really think this is a good day for a team like Indiana. This is a really good day for a team like Colorado. There are teams that are going to take advantage here because some of the chaos is creating opportunity instead of looking at a world where, holy moly, is that 11-1 team going to get in the playoff, right? So I do think there are some things happening here that are good for a lot of people. And when Indiana goes out against Michigan State and absolutely handles its business like that, then you earn the right to get some breathing room, I think. So I do think that was important there. We just want to reset a little bit more as some of these late windows finish up. And there is a point I want to make. I did go back. I listened to the James Franklin post-game news conference. I kind of listened to the teams that lost. I listened to James Franklin. I listened to Matt Rule at Nebraska, and I listened to some of Matt Campbell at Iowa State. Just for a reset, we're down to 4 Power 4 undefeateds. Double check me on this. Miami, BYU, who was off today, Indiana, and Oregon. Those are our 4 Power 4 because Iowa State lost, and Pitt's gonna lose, and now I've lost track of everybody. But anyway, like everybody else has already lost. So
yeah. I think they were
Penn State lost.
They put it up on the screen after the Iowa State loss. I think there were 6 left total.
Because Army is also
5 in Army. Yeah. And now
and Pitt's gonna lose.
Yeah.
So we'll have 4 Power 4 undefeated teams, and then we will have, I believe, by the time all this shakes out, 9 Power 4 1-loss teams. We'll have 8-1 to SMU, 7-1 Pitt in the ACC. We'll have 7-1 Iowa State in the Big 12. We'll have Ohio State, Penn State in the Big 10 with 1 loss. We'll have 1 loss Notre Dame, and then Georgia, Texas, Tennessee if Tennessee holds on in the SEC. So that's 13 then. Undefeated and 1 loss, and now we're getting more towards manageable playoff stuff. And then, of course, a bunch of teams with 2 losses that are still in it.
Yeah, I don't. It'll take. It was you, right, who had the too many 1-loss teams thing, right, when you were doing your playoff thing. And it made you a little nervous. I don't know.
Yeah, I was leaving 1-loss teams out left and right.
Now we have more 1-loss teams than we had when you even did that exercise. So
that's true.
On one hand, it does feel like things are starting to crystallize a little bit. On the other, it still has me a little not nervous, just interested in what might happen if we end up with a bunch of 1-loss teams.
This does. So this is one of those where on a day like this, I will say, and this is the difference, and not to ruin anything for anybody who hasn't seen anything, but the red wedding is kind of a thing in a certain thing where there's this thing. And what happens in the red wedding is that like everybody gets killed. But can you imagine if like they come in and they're giving you a little bit of this, and then you can say, but did the South cram it today? And they'd be like, yes, sire, the South crammed it royally. And you'd be like, well, at least that's good. And then you die because Texas A&M losing here, they just gave up another one to South Carolina. On the betting show, I was like, Tishu, why is this a 3-point game? South Carolina stinks. And he was like, I love South Carolina. And I was like, I don't understand sports. And South Carolina is undressing Texas A&M when Texas A&M for a week had become the new darling of the SEC. Watch out for Texas A&M. It's like, watch out for South Carolina.
I needed this to happen because I got caught up in the Texas A&M stuff when we were doing our playoff picks. I had them go into the SEC championship game. I had 2 SEC teams in the field, and they were one of them.
Texas A&M, Texas is going to be the biggest game of the year. Hey, you guys can ignore Ohio State, Michigan, because Texas A&M's going to be playing to win the SEC. Cram it, my God! So so this is one of those things where we want to embrace this other part of the show. The South is cramming it today for LSU. So Louisville has just been playing wild games with everybody, and then Louisville plays not that much of a wild game with Clemson because they just roll them. You just got rolled by Louisville. Louisville's 5-3, just at Clemson. Rolled them. So,
that's a bad Clemson defense. I'm glad that this happened too, so people can realize that.
So I will say, you said earlier, like your preseason pick to win the ACC was SMU. That's popping tonight, brother.
Yeah. This wasn't the path that I envisioned for them with the quarterback wonkiness, but maybe that's one prediction I will be on the right side of history for because all the other ones haven't been great.
So we're going to get to the stuff that matters. So we did not expect everyone to sit and partake of 7 hours and 44 minutes of watch-along discussion today. So we're not just be like, we already talked about Ohio State, Penn State. We're going to skip it. We're not going to skip it. But can I say a thing that I want to say first? Because Washington's going to beat USC. Washington just forced a Miller-Moss incompletion on 4th down.
Nice.
They're going to beat USC after USC was stopped in the red zone. It looks like there's maybe a celebration flag, but I think it's going to be okay.
Sorry, Bambi.
This is a thing I think we just have to be careful of. And James Franklin said a little bit in his post-game news conference, right? James Franklin said 99% of programs would die to be where we are as Penn State, which is, I know what he's saying. He also said he understands why the fans are frustrated. But I just think we have to be careful when we talk about coaches on the hot seat and our guy's going to get fired for stuff. It's like we forgot that Lincoln Riley exists. We could not stop. You could not stop the national media from talking about Lincoln Riley for 4 years. They would not shut up. It's like the guy invented football. This, is the biggest bust in the modern era of college football. That Lincoln Riley went to USC as a savior, escapes Norman, Oklahoma, and the idea that together they were pretty darn good and apart they're both horrible is crazy. But that he has gone and done this. Washington and USC were in, Jonah Coleman had a great game, by the way. Washington and USC were in very similar situations coming into this game. USC is now 4-5. And I'll double check the stat here in a second, what Lincoln Riley is in his last X number of games. But we cannot look at Ohio State, Penn State, and think Ryan Day and James Franklin can't win big games. They stink. And forget about the fact that Lincoln Riley is stealing money in Los Angeles. He's not in the North. He's in the Big Ten. We're not a conference. We're a region. We're an ethos. We're a culture. We're a community. And we don't want no LA folk. And we don't want Lincoln Riley. He is not of the North. He is not of us. This is so fraudulent, Landis. This is the number one story in college football. Not that James Franklin can't beat Ohio State, because James Franklin beats everybody else. Lincoln Riley can't beat Minnesota and Maryland and Washington. The list of who Lincoln Riley can't beat is as long as your arm. The only team he can beat is LSU. This is what we have to be talking about. So if I'm James Franklin, that's what my post-game news conference would be. You know what? We really should have won this game. We had opportunities against Ohio State, but at least I'm not Lincoln Riley.
So what is USC this year? You said they're 4-5?
They're 4-5. And what were they to end last year?
They lost 5 of their last 7 last year.
So they were 2-5 to end the year last year, and now they're 4-5. So he's 6-10 in his last 16 games at USC. What is USC? USC is Hollywood, beaches, and Division I football players. This is unbelievable. What an absolute fraud. But part of the deal is he's so bad that you forget about him. Just so this weekend on Sunday, when you are sitting around, please, whomever you are mad at, the college football coaches that you think are not winning big games, Lincoln Riley is winning 0 games. He had the Heisman Trophy winner and number 1 draft pick and did nothing with him. Had a quarterback throw 6 touchdowns in a bowl game. It was like, we're good. Wait till you see. I'm going to make Miller Moss the next Baker Mayfield. They stink. The Big Ten is eating USC alive. Thank God for Dan Lanning in Oregon, or this would be a complete mess. I think UCLA is better than USC. This is unbelievable, but we forget. When you're so bad you fall off the radar, I think sometimes you get less heat than you do than the teams that are good but not great, that are not getting over the top. So please, whatever energy you have for James Franklin today, please save at least a little bit of it for Bambi. He's like Jimbo. He's SoCal Jimbo, right? But I'm not sure anybody at USC, at least at Texas A&M, they cared enough to know they stunk. I'm not sure if anybody at USC cares enough to know that they stink. They stink. Okay. So Texas A&M is going to lose 43-20 now.
43-20.
Let's go back to the Ohio State Penn State game.
Okay.
We talked about it a lot during the game. We do have, so as people know, we also do like a local Ohio State show that is an offshoot of our other projects here as part of our company. And so I was asking that group of Ohio State fans some things. One of the things that I wanted to know from Ohio State fans is like, is this a big win? Because for Ryan Day and Ohio State, oftentimes it's like, well, when they lose, it's a big loss. When they win, it's not a big win. And the Ohio State fans that I communicated with, they do see this as a big win. They are not brushing this off as, because I did think, Landis, that it was possible that Ohio State fans would be like, I expect Ohio State to beat Penn State. Mm-hmm. But I think the Ohio State fan base, many of them were nervous enough coming off an iffy performance against Nebraska, off a loss to Oregon, that Penn State was undefeated, that it was at Beaver Stadium. I think there was enough there to make Ohio State fans realize that losing was possible, and then therefore the win is appreciated. I do not think the Ohio State fan base is taking this for granted. And I think almost maybe scaring the fans a little bit almost is maybe going to work in Ohio State's favor here, because I think people are jacked up that they found a way to win this game, including with a goal line stand when it really mattered.
Yeah, I think it's important how it happened. Not if it, I think there was a way for it to happen that maybe a decent chunk of the fan base would have just played it off as another win against Penn State and not something that answered some of the questions that have risen in the other big games that Ryan Day has coached in and lost. But I think the biggest things in those games have been line play, right? Rushing production, reliable rushing production, and then getting defensive stops. And for that game to end on a 4th and 1 goal line stand, where then Ohio State gets the ball back with 5:31 left and then doesn't give the ball back to Penn State. I don't know how you can answer that any more emphatically. And it's not, when I say that, I don't mean like everything's fixed. When next time Ohio State's in that situation against a good team, it's definitely going to perform the same way. But I think you got to give them some credit for doing that, right? I don't think you can just wipe that away as a James Franklin can't beat Ohio State conversation, because that was Ohio State doing stuff it has not always shown itself capable of doing under Ryan Day in that kind of game. And like, whatever, I know sometimes it's subjective who gets a number less than 5 next to their name and who doesn't. So if you don't want to call that a top 5 game or a similar top 5 game to the Michigans or the Georgia or the Oregon game earlier this year, I guess maybe you weren't going to have your mind changed either way, no matter what happened on Saturday. And I'm not necessarily saying if you were someone who was out on Ryan Day, you were wrong and you got to be all the way back in now. But I would just really focus on the football of it. And I thought that Ohio State really checked some boxes in some areas that had been coming up short in to finish this game off.
Pitt isn't officially in doors blown off stage. They were in the red zone, had a scoring chance. I think SMU got a turnover and just hit an 80-yard touchdown. It's going to be 48-11 SMU. I think that I agree with that completely. And then the other thing of that is trying to figure out if what Ohio State did on the offensive line, and Donovan Jackson, who slid out the left tackle, had a quote that everybody loved. It's about nuts,
which is great. Like,
you do love, like, you're here for nuts quotes.
Yeah, sometimes you gotta talk like a big dumb caveman. You know what I mean? to get your point across. That resonates with me. Yeah.
So he said, Pitt hit a crosser to Desiree, it bounced off him. SMU picked it in the end zone and then hit the next play down the seam, touchdown. But I don't think you think that's what it was, because that's I do think that's kind of fun, but I don't think that was just it. That the offensive line just showed up and decided to be physical today. I think weren't there schematic things that Chip Kelly and Ryan Day came up with, and they attacked Penn State in a better way. Yeah. And then also they got the right guys in the game. And so if that means that Carson Hinsman and Donovan Jackson, but it's not just like we wanted, because that's not it. It's not like we wanted it more. We were more physical. It's like, well, you actually did something, but they did. Because to me, the question is Ohio State's offensive line issue solved the way that Oregon solved theirs after 2 games? And they were not facing injury as much as inconsistency. They did move some guys around, and they didn't figure it out right away, but they did figure it out eventually. And we have to talk about that because Oregon had an offensive line injury on Saturday. We'll discuss. But then when they got it fixed, it was fixed. And that was it. And those days were behind them. Could that be what this is for the Ohio State offensive line that was playing pretty well until Josh Simmons got hurt, had the game where Simmons was hurt against Oregon, had a real problem last week, but now it's fixed. And going forward, all the problems are behind this offensive line.
I mean, I think it could be. I don't know. I don't know that I would say definitively yes after just one game. But I guess the other part of that is like, well, what better test could you want to prove it than playing against Penn State on the road, right? So maybe it is. I think. I guess if that ends up being the case, it wouldn't be terribly surprising that you sort of have to go through a game of a little bit of trial and error to land on the correct 5. And I guess what I will say is like I don't think you're never going to be the best version of yourself without Josh Simmons, who is
agreed.
I think like a lot of people rate as like a potential like top 50 NFL draft pick. He just really grown as a player, and on some level that is irreplaceable. But I think maybe Ohio State has landed on a combination that will be good enough for them moving forward. And that is, like, I thought Donovan Jackson had some problems with Abdul Carter, like on a couple of third downs where Abdul Carter really just kind of beat him with speed and got around the edge.
Yes.
And Donovan Jackson's going to have to continue to learn about the speed with which things happen when you're playing tackle as opposed to playing guard. He's also not going to see Abdul Carter every week, right? So I don't know that I saw those plays and thought to myself like, boy, they're lucky that worked. I don't think that's going to work long term. Like, no, I found a lot of what happened there encouraging in this game, and I thought Carson Hinsman stepping in for his first start of the season, his first start at guard, played really well. So yeah, it's definitely less of a concern for me now moving forward. I was definitely of the mind that Ohio State's offensive line situation could be the thing that really pushes this season to unravel on Ohio State. And I'm not saying I'm not saying spiral into a losing streak, but let's reset our expectations for what Ohio State can accomplish this year because this offensive line is not going to be ready for it. And I don't feel as much that way now after what I saw on Saturday.
Yeah, I agree. Did I say already that James Franklin said that was a championship drive at the end by Ohio State? Did I say that? You
did not say that. No, but I listened. I caught that too in his press conference. I thought that was like the most interesting thing he said.
Yeah. So I think this will be viewed as a very good win for Ohio State by the committee. I would guess that Ohio State will be number 3 in the committee rankings on Tuesday night, along with in the AP poll. They were number 4. I mean, it would be great to have Ohio State move past Georgia. And again, there's no committee rankings, so with the committee, they're not moving past anything. But I just don't know. I mean, Georgia looked like.
I don't know. I think Ohio State could be 2.
Raise your hand. Raise your hand if you beat a third-string Ivy League transfer at quarterback today. Oh, yeah, dog mentality. Take that, Yale. Can you please tell the story just for anyone who didn't watch Georgia, Florida, and why would you unless you hate yourself? Graham Mertz is already out for the year for Florida. DJ Lagway, their great freshman, suffered a very unfortunate injury, left on the cart, and they put in Adrian Warner, who the most interesting thing about him is that he is not related to Kurt Warner.
He's not related to Kurt Warner, which I Googled at the end of the Georgia-Kentucky game, or Georgia-Florida game, excuse me. And there was an article specifically said, like, what is the relationship between Adrian Warner and Kurt Warner, the NFL Hall of Famer? Then he had to scroll down half the page just to get the answer was they're not related. I was like, okay. It was the perfect encapsulation of internet journalism in 2024. But shout out to Sporting News. Shout out to Sporting News. Yeah. Yo, I'm the dummy who's out there fishing for that info.
They got you, brother.
Sporting News delivered. Yeah.
Hey, you know, those Ivy League quarterbacks, man, grit. You never know. I got to work on the Kirby, but come on, man. So Carson Beck, I think I saw, to paraphrase something he said in postgame, was like, we moved the ball pretty well when I wasn't screwing up, which Carson Beck had a terrible game. And if Florida had a normal quarterback, Florida had a very good chance to win that. I actually, as much as I think Ole Miss is a fraud, and I will continue to think that Ole Miss is a fraud. Ole Miss scored 1,000 again today. Mm-hmm. I actually think Ole Miss has a shot against Georgia. Because if they can do enough, the Georgia has a good defense, but if Ole Miss can get Georgia in a track meet and force Carson Beck to try to play catch up offensively, let's go blow for blow. I don't think he can. And I think he's going to get in his own head. And again, I just think that Georgia is stacking uncertain performances. So let's please be aware of that. So you're saying maybe the committee is actually aware of that.
I think they would be. Like, if you're, I don't know. I guess Georgia has a close loss. No, what was Georgia lost to
Bama
on the road, right?
Yeah. and then one at Texas.
And then one at Texas.
Beat Kentucky by a point.
Ohio State's resume is better, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, this is a great one. This changes. That's the thing about this. You have to remember this. This is Ohio State didn't have a good win. They just won at number 3. Mm-hmm. That's a huge win. It's probably it's the second best win of the college football season.
Yeah,
probably because I do think
Oregon beating Ohio State. Yeah.
Well, but those are at home. Like Bama beating Georgia's at home. Like I was gonna say Georgia at Texas, right? So maybe because I just do think the committee sometimes like the good road wins. I think really get their attention.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So, but not to take for granted what Oregon did in that game. So they are just mobbing Shane Beamer. What is it like to beat Texas A&M? You know, Texas A&M, people were anointing them the national champs, and we handled business. Tennessee's going to win at least. This is a really good win for Ohio State. We will continue to talk about that going forward. Ohio State now is going to go back in the hole a little bit, at least from an interest perspective, because they are home against Purdue and at Northwestern the next 2 weeks. And then I think Indiana, Ohio State on November 23rd has a chance to be really good.
So Indiana plays Michigan at home next week, and then it's off right before it plays Ohio State. Yeah.
Really good. I think it has a chance to be really good. So we want to make sure we acknowledge that, and that goal line stand is real, but I want to talk about it from Penn State perspective because Penn State's got some more stuff to deal with now. Mm-hmm. James Franklin was asked about those 4 plays. He said the game came down to the fact that they threw a pick in the end zone from the 3-yard line and then got stopped on downs, that they had 2 possessions inside the 5 and didn't score any points. Yeah. Doesn't take a lot to figure out that was super crucial in a 7-point game. Get that thing off my head. So he was asked about, they ran 3 run plays and then on 4th down threw incomplete. And to the credit to the reporters who were there, he was asked, like, why didn't they try to get the ball to Ty Warren? And he said, we gave the ball to the running back 3 times. Should we probably have given the ball to Ty Warren after the way he'd played? I get it. It's like one of those things. It's like, why? How is that like a post-game second guess? So I don't know. I have not yet had a chance to dive into those 3 plays. They just ran inside, right? They just ran between the guards 3 straight times.
They were doing this stuff with Vengo Iwane in motion, the 6 lineman stuff. But yeah, they were just kind of, I guess that's like a split zone run. Yeah. 3 times. And then the pass, I think they were trying to get to Warren, and Ohio State had it covered with Lathan Ransom, and Sonny Styles was there too. And then he kind of Drew Aller came off that and tried to throw it to, was it Khalil Dinkins was the next guy he tried to throw it to? And then he was covered by Caleb Downs. So that was I think it seemed like Ohio State had a pretty good idea of what Penn State was going to try to do there on that 4th down pass. It's just like, it's astonishing to me that what got them down there in the first place was Ty Warren running the ball, right? And it does sound so silly.
I can't believe they didn't do it one time. The Ty Warren.
Yeah, I thought, right.
And even if you do something different, if you run the ball inside on 1st down and don't get it, if then on 2nd down you do something different, and then on 3rd down you want to go back to running it inside, maybe you've at least loosened that up a little bit.
Yeah.
So like that,
or even like giving some kind of 11-man run threat, whether that's with Ty Warren or bringing Bo Perbula into the game. James Franklin was asked about Bo Perbula too, and he said they used him and they just didn't think like it was effective when they put him in the game. So
they gave up.
Yeah, I think what he played like 3 or 4 snaps.
They gave up on that fast.
They gave up on it real fast, and also didn't, unless I'm misremembering, didn't really try it at the times you think they'd want to try it most when they are in the short red zone and the 11-man run game becomes such a weapon down there. It was mismanaged a little bit. I don't know who's making that call. I'm assuming it's Andy Kotelnicki who's making the personnel and play calling decisions, like sort of free of James Franklin in those scenarios. But I don't know. Maybe it wasn't. I don't know who's 100% to blame there. But the play calling was puzzling nonetheless.
So if you missed the beginning of the show, one of the points is any energy you have for James Franklin needs to be better. Please apply some of that to the fraud Lincoln Riley, who is now, what was the stat we said? 6-10 in his last 16 games as a head coach. 6-10. Right.
Yeah.
6-10. Did you catch like the last thing James Franklin said in his news conference? There were a lot of things I planned on saying when I came in here.
Yeah.
There were a lot of things I planned on saying when I came in here, but they are not appropriate to say right now. So I'll hold them till another time.
I think that's ref stuff.
Oh,
I
said
think
there were a lot of 50-50 calls.
Yeah,
but
I think the one
Okay.
maybe the taunting penalty that extended, I think, a touchdown drive for Ohio State. I didn't have any issue with the call, but I think that one. I think maybe he thought that Davis Nigbinosin was a little too physical in the interception in the end zone. I also wouldn't agree with that.
But he also he was saying that like it was ruled incomplete and then overturned into an interception.
I think that was referee stuff. Yeah.
Okay, I don't want to put words in his mouth. I thought maybe he was saying he was going to come in and tell the fans to get bent, and I decided not to because he had a confrontation with the fan coming off. I don't. If like on Tuesday, that would be my first question. James, you had some things you said weren't appropriate to say right now. Do you want to say them now? Would you like to say them now? Because I'm very curious. And again, he said 99% of programs would die to be where we die to do what we've done. This is the last point on Penn State, and I think this is an important one. The context of college football has changed in the 12-team playoff, and we've been saying since the beginning of the year that we thought perhaps the program that would be helped the most by a 12-team playoff is Penn State. I think they're literally number one on my list because all of a sudden you don't have to beat Michigan and Ohio State to get where you want to go. You're going to have a chance to get in the playoff and take your shot if you handle your business elsewhere. And again, this is James Franklin's 11th season. Penn State would have made a 12-team playoff in 6 of the last 8 years, which is pretty amazing. Like that is no matter who you are, no matter what national championship standards you think you may have, like 6 out of 8 12-team playoffs is awesome. So he said that tonight. He said that the game of college football has changed. I understand the frustration, but college football has changed, and we have an opportunity right in front of us to right some wrongs from today. So it's going to be interesting to me. It feels like James Franklin believes that maybe Penn State does not have to change as a program because the changing in the sport is going to be what creates opportunities for them. Now, if you make 6 out of 8 12-team playoffs and you lose in the first round every time, that's just another way to frustrate your fans. But I don't think Penn State is the type of program that's going to lose in the first round every time. I don't. I think Penn State's going to win some playoff games the next 6 years.
Yeah, especially if it's going to get someone home. Yeah.
Yeah, but is that enough? And I found it interesting that it's sort of, I think you can look at this result and the way the game was played and the lack of creativity and the lack of aggression, getting after it in key situations, and say it's the same old frustrating James Franklin. And I don't know that James Franklin would disagree, except the world has changed. And now the world is more receptive to what we are. We may not be more at Penn State, but the world is more receptive to what we are. We are Penn State. You know what I mean? We are Penn State. Is that when people say that? What if it changed to like
that's what they meant. Yeah. I don't know.
But you know what I mean? That he's almost. I just said it in a way, and I don't disagree with him. But it's sometimes head coaches say things that really only podcasters should say. Neil Brown did this the other week at West Virginia. Like, we'll provide the context to help people understand, but you should probably be mad you lost.
Yeah, that's my biggest thing is that like nothing James Franklin said was factually incorrect. I don't think it's anything anything that Penn State fans wanted to hear in that situation. And I do think like you and I have had conversations both on the show and off the show about what proper expectations should be for Penn State and whether or not Penn State should actually have national championship expectations or be kind of happy to be in the hunt. And maybe it's the latter that Penn State should just be happy to be a team that is going to more often than not make the college football playoff. But don't you want to have like hope too that you can do something once you're there? And I think they are caught a little in between at the moment in having a head coach who I think will almost definitely do what needs to be done to get you there, and then the fan base having zero belief whatsoever that he can do anything once he is there. And that's a really tough spot to be in.
But I want to wait to judge them until they get there the first time. Because
with 3-17 against or 3-18 against top whatever teams isn't
but that is
sample size. It's
because
it's all Michigan and Ohio State.
Yes.
Mostly Michigan and Ohio State. Yeah.
So let me see when it's Tennessee, because there are some other teams out there that are top 10 programs that don't beat anybody.
Mm-hmm.
So like that actually is exactly what I mean.
Yeah.
They've been banging their head into the same wall. Let them bang their head into a different wall, and maybe their head will bust through this time. Penn State, we are Penn State. Just the we are is not as robust as Penn State fans would like it to be. All right, I'm not shocked by how that went through it, but I'll be curious when Andy Kotelnicki gets in front of the Penn State media the next time how he talks about those goal line situations, what they did and didn't do, because you were asking during the 7-hour and 44-minute watch along if Andy Kotelnicki is even calling those plays, because they felt James Franklin-esque in your mind.
Yeah, it felt like I've seen that before. I guess no matter who Penn State's offensive coordinator is, that's a familiar sight in that game.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about Oregon's win over Michigan, and the real story here. I don't want to gloss over Oregon doing its thing, because Oregon seriously, like, legitimately did the exact same thing it has done in every other game, which is really control the first half and then kind of ease into the end of the game. But they still, as soon as Michigan threatened a little bit and got it down to 2 scores, Oregon then drove for a touchdown to kill the cover and that kind of thing. Jordan James, 23 carries, 117 yards and a touchdown. But 2 really, truly major injuries. And Dan Lanning, the Oregon head coach, was not specific about them. But let's start with the one that gets a little less attention. It's Marcus Harper at right guard. Went out with what looked like a knee injury, just trying to check in with, just reading the tweets and some of the stories of some of the Oregon writers. It just feels like maybe that could be a thing, that this was not just for this game. That would affect Oregon. If the guy who has helped nail down things at right guard after their reshuffle is out, that would be a big injury for them.
Yeah, so he's been a starter every game this year. He started 10 games in 2022. He started 14 games last year, and he's just been a really good player for them, like a steady presence on their offensive line. And it'd be a really tough break for Oregon, which had finally got its offensive line stuff settled. And that offensive line had been building a lot of momentum too, I think, toward becoming one of the best in the country, in my opinion. And now you're potentially pulling a major piece out of there, and you're pulling it from the interior, which is the part of the line that had the question marks early on in the year to begin with, including moving Marcus Harper, switching him sides when they did settle on a different starting center and a new other guard up front. So it's definitely something to monitor. I don't know. I mean, with the Matthew Bedford edition in the offseason, he's not played at all. Yeah. I don't know if there's maybe an opportunity for him to come back and try to play. I'm not entirely, if this is more of a long-term thing for Marcus Harper, I'm not sure. But if Bedford can't play and Oregon's going to be really thin on interior line depth, that is something obviously that'll worry you moving forward. Marcus Harper, in my opinion, is not the same caliber of player as Josh Simmons. I don't think he quite meets that standard, but I think you start then having similar questions to the questions we were having about Ohio State after Josh Simmons' injury with that offensive line.
So it's just one of those things that, offensive line can be fraught. And if you're a good, deep blue blood program, you've got to have depth there, but not everybody does all the time. And so this is just something to monitor. You hope that Marcus Harper is okay and that he can come back quickly, but it is something that is on alert. We also maybe could introduce this on the show, the Bambi stat of the week. Producer Mike has sent to us first 36 games as USC's head coach. Clay Helton, 27-9. Lincoln Riley, 23-13.
Did you see the other stat that he sent us?
Well, we were talking about that one. This is your stat. You talked about this stat. You can talk about this.
No. The other Lincoln Riley stat.
Oh, what was the other Lincoln Riley stat?
USC has blown 5 fourth quarter leads in its 5 Big Ten losses.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That seems like a lot.
It's on the internet. It's got to be true. I didn't bother to look it up.
I think he might be looking to get out. Where could he go?
Oh, he's quiet quitting for sure. Yeah.
Maybe he can go to Clemson.
He's going to be an NFL offensive coordinator next year.
Yeah. Wow.
He just can't.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. But do you want to talk about this? The Knowles Andy Kotelnicki stat? Jim Knowles and Andy Kotelnicki?
Oh yeah, that was the other one you were talking about. Yeah, Jim Knowles is the first defensive coordinator since 2021 to hold an Andy Koltelnicki offense without a touchdown, and the last one to do it before today was Jim Knowles in 2021 when Oklahoma State played Kansas. That was Jim's last year at Oklahoma State and like a pretty bad Kansas offense. So this carries a little more water, but I think we actually didn't talk much about that. I feel like a lot of the conversation going into the Ohio State Penn State game was almost exclusively about Ohio State's offense and its offensive line against Penn State's defense and that defensive line. There wasn't a lot of Andy Koltelnicki versus Jim Knowles talk, but there should be, I think, coming out of this game because Jim Knowles absolutely got the better of that matchup by keeping Penn State's offense out of the end zone.
I just like to envision like Jim Knowles staying behind in State College, like missing the team plane and being like, I'll get myself home by tomorrow, and just going to some bar and smoking a cigar with Andy Koltelnicki and chopping it up, about scheming it up. Can't you see those two guys just hanging it out? Jim, Andy. Second injury for Oregon that's really unfortunate is Tez Johnson, who went out early in the game, and I guess the sideline reporter, they're talking about during the game that it could have been maybe a shoulder issue or a collarbone issue. And again, after the game, Dan Lanning didn't say much about it, but Tez Johnson just said they didn't know yet. But Tez Johnson did have his arm in a sling. Now, Trayshawn Holden responded and had a huge game with 6 catches for 149. Again, Evan Stewart, the up and down nature, and it's not even up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. It's like up, down, 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 up, down, down, down. Evan Stewart, 3 catches, 16, and a touchdown. It was a ridiculous touchdown catch, but it's still only 3 catches for 16 yards. As you said, Justice Lowe had been coming on for the Oregon offense. I do think Trayshawn Holden can do a version of a lot of the things that Oregon does, but it's just one of those where, you know, you saw with Alabama a couple years ago when they lost the national title game to Georgia, it was just like eventually they had enough receiver injuries that you just had no firepower left by the end of the year. Yeah. So Tez Johnson is a huge loss, but I think where it is, they already were playing without Gary Bryant Jr. for the whole year, where it's really a huge loss for Oregon. It's like, well, then if something else happens, and now all of a sudden, like, you're out of firepower. So I still think Oregon has a lot of firepower, but Tez Johnson is one of the best receivers in college football. This is Ohio State lost to Oregon and came out of that game with a huge injury to Josh Simmons. It's possible that Oregon got this win over Michigan. It's coming out with a huge injury that absolutely has a long-term effect on them if Tez Johnson's hurt for a while.
I think he's their best offensive player. Would you disagree with that?
Nope, I would not disagree.
Yeah. So they have, you know, good enough other receivers that maybe they can soften that blow a little bit, but the difficulty with Oregon is everything that it throws at you, right? It's especially when you get Evan Stewart playing really well. So, and if you're not going to get that consistently, and you're not going to have Tez Johnson for a while, we don't know if that's the case. Maybe he'll come back quicker, but if that is a long-term thing, I think Oregon just becomes a little easier to defend. Especially for the teams that are equipped to score with Oregon, the teams that it will play. That's mostly a postseason conversation because I don't know who left on Oregon's schedule actually would meet that criteria. So I don't know that I'm rethinking Oregon's path to the Big Ten championship in light of that injury. But if that's something that is, you know, potentially season ending or whatever, then I think you start to rethink Oregon's ceiling a little bit because I do think Tez Johnson's that good.
Yeah. So that'll be something to monitor clearly on Monday and Tuesday when we find out a little bit more about those injuries. I do want to just talk about Indiana briefly from the perspective of on Wednesday, I was in a panic about an 11-1 Indiana team potentially not making the playoff. I think that might be off the table now based on some of the upsets here that happened that loosened up the field and also Indiana just looking like this. I think the committee will respond to the efficiency and the numbers behind Indiana on both sides of the ball, but especially offensively. I think they will be ranked higher by the committee than they are in the AP poll. But going to Michigan State and putting it on at least an average team, Michigan State's average. They're not horrible, right? I mean, they've played some really competitive games with Boston College and Maryland, and they were competitive with Michigan last week, and they have a win over. They're not horrible. And Indiana destroyed them. On the road. I think this gets people's attention. And when you combine game control and taking people apart with efficiency metrics, I now think that it's almost impossible that an 11-1 Indiana team wouldn't get in because there's going to be less competition than what I initially thought. And also, I think they're rising up the respect meter when you do stuff like this.
I think that's probably right. I get people are going to be really keyed in on, I think, what Indiana does against Michigan next week.
Yep.
Indiana should win that game, but kind of like how much? Because that is on the lines. That is something different than Michigan, or excuse me, that Indiana has seen so far this year. So if this level of play persists there, then I think that might. And it's not. I don't think the world of Michigan, but I think that might maybe bring some more doubters along for people who are wondering just how good Indiana is. But this is really, I mean, they're blowing the doors off teams. I think they know they have to.
Yes.
So
but then they are also capable. But they're capable of doing it.
Right.
There's acknowledging the problem.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with clock's still running. You're still playing football. Like I'm not accusing Indiana of running up the score, but I do think Kurt Cignetti definitely knows how his team is perceived and what it needs to do to break those perceptions. To the point of even, I think after the game, he tweeted like, well, I guess we know how we'll respond when we get down in the game, right? Because they trailed for the first time this season in this game. They were down 3-0 and then 10-0 and then scored, I think, the next 42 points or whatever it was to go up 42-10 at one point. So as long as and maybe we're even past the point of saying as long as they keep winning games by this margin, it's play Ohio State competitively, whatever that result is, and win the rest of your games, and you're probably in based off what else has happened around the country. And I actually think two things help Indiana. One is what you said earlier, that this was a weird weekend and Indiana just did its thing again, right? Just blew Michigan off the field. But Indiana, if you watched Indiana last week in the game where it didn't have Curtis Rourke and thought to yourself, the offense looks a little out of sorts. I think Indiana only threw the ball one time in the second half of that game. And then it gets Curtis Rourke back and immediately like hits the ground running again. And Curtis Rourke throws 4 touchdowns. It's like, oh yeah, that's what a full powered Indiana looks like. I think that could be helpful too as we look ahead to the first playoff rankings on Tuesday.
Interesting that there are 4 really good teams in the Big Ten and then a gap. And that is just super clear now. Not that it wasn't, but you have undefeated Oregon and Indiana, 1 loss Penn State and Ohio State. And then the Big Ten's not getting in 5 because there aren't 5. But I think we're approaching the point of the Big Ten almost certainly getting in 4. Because I do think there's probably even enough wiggle room here that 10-2 Penn State gets in. Or if Ohio State would lose to Indiana, I think 10-2 Ohio State gets in. But it's so odd that there's such a clear line because we had, it's like, oh, what if the Big Ten could get... So here's my question, and I want to move to Minnesota, Illinois briefly. Who's the 5th best team in the Big Ten? The way they're playing right now, I think it might be Minnesota. Now, Minnesota lost to Iowa convincingly early in the year. Caleb Johnson ran all over them, and Iowa just took it to Wisconsin tonight. So it also might be Iowa, but I think it's probably between Iowa and Minnesota, and if they played again, I might take Minnesota. Minnesota is playing excellent football right now. Such good football that it makes me sad that they screwed up that North Carolina game early in the year. But also, I don't know if Illinois was driving. They lose by 8. They're driving at the end. They're in a red zone, and Minnesota gets like a strip sack to end the game on Luke Altmaier in the final 30 seconds. So they are finding ways to win games offensively. They've won very close games at the end against UCLA, against USC. Now here it is again against Illinois, but they are suddenly a team that makes winning plays and has a super efficient quarterback and a bunch of skill guys, and their offensive line has come around, and Minnesota's a good football team.
They are. They've been ascending, I think, for much of the season. I would still say Iowa is the 5th best team because, as you said, Iowa beat Minnesota and beat them pretty handily, 31-14 that game was. Yeah. I did find myself as I was watching Iowa finish off its game today, like a little bummed that game had already happened because I think I view Iowa a little differently in light of its quarterback change. Not that Brendan Sullivan set the world on fire today, but I thought you could see the extra gear that he gives that offense. And then Minnesota's playing really well, and it's just the nature of the college football season that or just luck of the draw, I guess, randomly that game got put on the slate in September, so you didn't get probably the best version of either team there. You certainly didn't get the best version of Minnesota. But Minnesota's still playing really well and has probably 8-4 on the table. I would say 9-3 would require them beating Penn State at home on November 23rd, which I wouldn't pick right now. Although I guess that could get tricky for Penn State. But Indiana staring down an 8-4 after back-to-back losses there to Iowa and Michigan, and you're sort of wondering are they going to be able to scrape it together and get the bowl eligibility? Well, they already have.
And I think Iowa's staring down a 9-3. They're 6-3 at UCLA, off week at Maryland, and then Nebraska on Black Friday. And, early in the year we were theorizing, could that Nebraska-Iowa game have playoff implications? That's not going to be the case. But Iowa is certainly a better team than Nebraska right now with the way they're playing. So,
yeah. No, I think Iowa took a loss where it was a little banged up against Michigan State, and you're going to look back and maybe kick yourself for that one because that's going to maybe keep you from finishing 10-2, and then who knows? Like if Iowa was sitting here with one loss or two losses right now, we'd be talking about them as a lurker. The same way we were talking about Illinois before that loss today, right? But not going to get there because of that loss to Michigan State. But I would be pretty surprised if Iowa was not holding the 9-3 at the end of the year based on how they're playing in the schedule. 40-14 last week against Northwestern, 42-10 against Wisconsin today. Like that was Iowa overs, by the way. Iowa overs.
How about that?
People
are built houses on Iowa unders for a decade, and now they're going to have to tear their house down.
Yeah.
I did want to talk about Nebraska briefly because, again, in watching the Matt Rule news conference after that loss to UCLA, he kept talking about a missed opportunity, and he said, if I was in the stands, I'd be frustrated too. He did not get asked specifically about the speech, and hey, you gave a great speech and it didn't work, but just like a really disappointing effort for Nebraska. And credit, he talked about Ethan Garbers, the UCLA quarterback. Some of his runs got to them that UCLA had done, was coming after them with some zero blitzes. He thought Dylan Raiola, they really came after him in the first half, and then that continued to sort of make him uncomfortable in the second half. Dylan Raiola threw a really rough interception for pick six that really hurt them. It sounded like Matt Rule was saying there's an open route somewhere else in that route tree, and he didn't throw to the right guy. And then Dylan Raiola got hurt. I guess he tried to come back in and it hurt too much. He said it was his back. I thought when we were talking on the watch along show, I thought it was more hip, but Matt Rule said more just like a hit he took in the back. So it was interesting. Like James Franklin's news conference was like 7 minutes long after that loss, and Matt Rule went for like 15 minutes and ended his speech and said, I'm sure you'll have questions and I'll answer all of them. And so he stood up there and took it. But like, to me, this is for them to be blown off the field by Indiana, compete really well against Ohio State, and then go home and kind of give away this game against UCLA. There's an up and down nature to the program that if I were a Nebraska fan, I wouldn't feel great about right now.
Yeah, I think there was definitely a turn, and how could there not be, after the Indiana game, with a lot of questions about what that program is, what it's becoming, where it was relative to where people thought it should be by that point under Matt Rule. And then it really did feel like Matt Rule snatched some of that back with the Ohio State game, even in a loss. And I'm assuming he's kind of giving it all away again, right? It's not. I like Matt Rule. I think Matt Rule kind of feels like the right guy still to get that program turned around and to be consistently competitive and better than it has been, but it's been a really rough run for Nebraska fans, and it's a little disheartening, I think, to see that kind of performance out of Nebraska. There's always the element of the physical toll that playing in Ohio State or in Oregon or in Michigan or Penn State will take on a team like Nebraska, and then having to come back the next week playing. And I think they were playing UCLA was UCLA I guess played last week.
No, they didn't. I think they were off the bye because Matt Rule mentioned that. Matt Rule said,
really off.
He's like, well, I don't want to make excuses like a football coach, but you play a team off a bye and stuff like that.
It's not an excuse, but I think it is. It's realizing the reality of the situation a little bit.
Yeah.
Regardless, Nebraska should have played better. And I don't. Did Matt Rule give that speech to his team, or did he just give it to the media, like kind of thing? I don't know. It just. That speech happens, you think to yourself, like, yeah, right, it worked on me too. You think to yourself, like, boy, this guy's really at the pulse of his team. They're going to turn this thing around. And then it's like, well, I guess maybe he didn't say those words to them. They just went back to the practice field and carried on with their normal business. And then it leads you to this result.
I think that is almost more. And again, as much as I always say, I'd rather take a close loss than a blowout loss. But when you show your fans what you can be, the way Nebraska showed that against Ohio State, that's in there somewhere. They had a good game plan. They competed. They got after the quarterback. I still think in the end that game was much more about the things Ohio State failed to do than what Nebraska did. And I actually think this week sort of played that out. That if it was, I don't know. There were times last week I was like, I don't know. Like, did Nebraska even play that well? That was just Ohio State screwing up. And I was like, am I not giving Nebraska enough credit? But then I think you look at this week and it's like, Ohio State fixed its stuff and beat the number 3 team in the country, and Nebraska just went home and lost to UCLA. So how good were they really? But the bottom line is that they competed and they were right there with the national championship contender. And to bracket that with 2 games where it feels like you don't really show up. And I know they came back and they made it close against UCLA. If you stink, you stink. If you have a billion injuries and you can't compete, you can't compete. But I almost think squeezing that competitive game in almost makes it worse, because it's like, where is that again? Why can't we see that again? And I understand if Nebraska fans are very frustrated right now. Yeah. Let's go to this Pitt game that just ended before we get to the 2 Big 12 losses. 48-25 is the final. SMU just destroys Pitt. We thought the Pitt defense obviously had played lights out against Syracuse, and the Pitt offense had been on a downward trend. But it didn't matter. And again, the Pitt offense didn't play that well against Syracuse, but they intercepted Common Core 5 times, so it didn't matter. I thought maybe, what if you get a good Pitt offense and a good Pitt defense in the same game now? Mm-hmm. What would that be against SMU? And I actually think they got a bad defense and a bad offense, and then they could have lost by 60.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. And I think we were probably a little too excited about what we saw from Pitt's defense against Syracuse. 306 passing yards from SMU in this game. Kevin Jennings was really good, I thought. Really outshined Eli Holstein, but the SMU was doing whatever it wanted. It's just and I don't know if that's a lot of like some of the aggression working against Pitt. I'll be curious to see. We talked about like going into the game from a blitz perspective, what Pitt did here, and whether or not Kevin Jennings, who was among the best quarterbacks in the country against the blitz, like tore them apart against that stuff. I kind of checked out of it pretty early because it was kind of a runaway from the jump. But Eli Holstein has not played very well. 62% completions, 248 passing, no touchdowns, an interception, 19 yards rushing on 10 carries. Didn't get the run game going at all. Des Reed kind of got taken out of the game a little bit. They're like the best thing for Pitt's offense is Nate Yarnell playing and throwing 2 garbage time touchdowns. So the offensive issues persist, and the defensive turnaround was probably grossly overstated for Pitt. I don't know that means like Pitt now starts going, down a path where the season gets away from them a little bit, right? I think Pitt can beat Clemson based off what we saw today, based on what we've seen from Pitt previously in the year, and the fact that game is in Pittsburgh. But with Miami unbeaten in the league and SMU is still unbeaten in the league too.
Unbeaten, right? Yeah.
The path to the ACC championship took a decent size hit today for Pitt. Yeah,
I think Pitt can beat Clemson, but it might not matter. We might just be we might just be headed towards SMU, Miami, and this was the and this weekend was decisive in deciding that. I just thought it felt like in that Syracuse Pitt game, Pitt got momentum and then got downhill as a defense, and it looked like there were 13 guys on the field sometimes. And I thought SMU got to that point very quickly in this game, where they just got downhill as a defense and they were smothering everything Pitt was trying to do. And so I compared it. We've seen Syracuse get blitzed at Pitt. We've seen Kansas State get blitzed at BYU, and we saw Pitt get blitzed at SMU. Sometimes you go on the road and you get caught in a storm. And is that who you are, or is it a really bad night against a team that made you pay for it? I do think there were still maybe some things here that this is actually part of Pitt's deal, and that the offense has been leaking for a while, and Kevin Jennings played really well. If the opposing quarterback's not throwing it to him, maybe the defense isn't quite as good as we think. They get Virginia next week before Clemson. I'll be really curious to see how Pitt bounces back. Because, for instance, Syracuse didn't play a great game against Virginia Tech today, but they found a way to win in overtime as a home underdog. So they did not, and Kansas State found ways to bounce back and win at Colorado, and before their loss today, do some things. They did not let that BYU blitz loss ruin their season. So you just have to wait now. I mean, there's the ACC is nuts. So a one-loss Pitt team in the conference is still very competitive there, but it's very possible now that, I mean, certainly it's no longer in their control. SMU and Miami are on a path to the ACC title game unless there's an upset in there.
Right. And I think what could potentially become an issue, and we'll see, obviously, if Pitt loses to Clemson, it won't matter anyway, but like SMU just look far more athletic than Pitt. Like I think there's it's not just the score. You could like eye test this thing and think to yourself, like, yeah, Pitt's had a nice season, but there's maybe not a whole lot there from a talent perspective, or at least not relative to some other teams it might find itself in contention with if it got to that point. And they're sitting at 11-1 or something like that. So I thought the Branson Taylor injury on Pitt's offensive line, I thought kind of reared its head a little bit tonight. Just not a lot of offensive line depth, obviously, there for Pitt. And that's probably their best guy at tackle that's now not playing. And then SMU finished with 3 sacks, 9 tackles for loss. It just seemed like they really overwhelmed Pitt on both sides.
Yeah. All right. Last 2 games we want to talk about, these 2 Big 12 chaos monsters. First is the Iowa State loss at home to Texas Tech. Matt Campbell, after the game, just talking about sort of a lack of detail and some things, felt like they never could get any momentum. He blamed himself for that. They'd been playing with fire a little bit this year. Texas Tech wins 23-22. They had a big play late in the game to take a lead on a touchdown by a little used guy Carson Brown, who had 4 catches the entire year. And Matt Campbell was asked, like, how'd you feel after that? And he's sort of like, I don't know, like, still not that great, right? That even though that's Iowa State going ahead at home, they have enough explosive players that I do, as much as I've talked about, I like this team because they are fundamental and explosive. I kind of wish they were a little more explosive. And I don't know, like 22 against Texas Tech leaves me a little wanting more.
It's bad defense. That's a bad passing defense. And like there was rain. And I don't know whether it was like actually on the field, but this is, how could you paint this as anything other than a really disappointing result for Iowa State, especially at home. And it's not so much that Texas Tech was able to score, because I kind of thought that might happen. It's that Rocco Becht and Jaden Higgins and Jalen Knoll couldn't put up more in this game against quite literally the worst pass defense in the country. And they couldn't move the ball all that consistently, and didn't hit big plays with any kind of regularity. Yeah.
Missed the field goal, fumbled on the first drive of the second half, threw a pick, got stopped on downs early. I just think there's more there, I think, to the Iowa State offense at times. Rocco Becht throws for 299. Abu Sama, as we were talking to the game, 13 carries for 74. Jaden Higgins goes 10 for 140. Woo! That guy is excellent, man.
Mm-hmm.
But it just like it equates to 22 points.
Yeah.
They outgained Texas Tech 432 to 366. 5 of 16 on third down, which is not great, but Ohio State was 1 of 10 against Nebraska. 1 of 2 on fourth down. I just feel like they should have scored. They should have scored more points. They had more penalties than usual. Matt Campbell was sort of intimating that he thought the officials were calling some things that they hadn't called early in the year. That Iowa State was doing the same stuff, and now it's a penalty. I assume that's holding and stuff like that, right? This is what we do, and now it's a penalty. But yeah,
what was Iowa State's red zone? What was their red zone conversion rate?
I was not looking at stat broadcasts, so I did not see. You have it?
Yeah, 3 for 3, but
field goals.
At least one of those was a field goal. Field goal from the 19. Field goal from the 3.
I think we could be disappointed in Iowa State. I mean, we were having this discussion on the watch along of like, well, Is it a team that's kind of overachieving in some way? And so do you hold them to a different standard than when you look at Miami's talent? Miami's trying to lose games all the time. This is a disappointing loss.
Mm-hmm.
They had a path here, and this was not the way that this was not the team that should have gotten in their way like this. Texas Tech's played some goofy games this year, but Iowa State's better than this.
Yeah, but I think like Matt Campbell tried to warn us about this a couple weeks ago too, right? Like when he talked about starting slow, getting in a hole. Like you start slow, you get in a hole against Texas Tech. The weather's weird. It's like the stage is not quite right for you to mount your comeback kind of thing, and you get burned for it. Like this is a team that just has had trouble this year starting games the right way, and they've lived to tell about it until today. So it's not. I don't think Iowa State was going to be able to go through the entire season operating that way and not take a loss. I didn't think it was going to come today, but I don't know. Maybe the fact that it did come today will kind of get them refocused on what they need to focus on to avoid these slow starts. Because, like, honestly, it can win the rest of its games, but if Texas Tech can beat them, then like Kansas playing better can beat them, and Cincinnati, I think, can beat them, right? So, they got to be a little careful here. I think that they don't let this spiral into something. I like Kansas State, or excuse me, I like Iowa State a lot, but it's not like we're not talking about an unbeaten like Indiana, who you've called a machine that just like gets it done on both sides of the ball. You don't worry about it. Like Iowa State has defensive injuries and some defensive issues, and has an inconsistent offense that definitely possesses explosive traits, but does it get to them regularly enough? I think probably not. So it's got to find a way to get more of that working together to finish this season off with just the one loss, and then see if you can get into the Big 12 championship.
They're not out of it. If they win the rest of their games, they're going to the playoff. If they beat Kansas State. If they win the rest of the games and beat Kansas State, they'll be in the Big 10 championship or the Big 12 championship game. If they win the Big 12 championship game, they're in the playoff. It's funny. The ACC network is doing a post game next to the field at SMU Pitt, and the SMU horse was just standing behind the two guys who were talking with his giant horse face, just standing there nodding along like, that is a great point. I have a horse face. That is a fantastic thing that you just said. Horses are great. Did you watch BoJack Horseman? It's a cartoon.
No, I want to. Yeah.
People, I thought BoJack Horseman was like one of those things like everybody agreed was like, that is like great art. And then I was like seeing some social media stuff that every day there's like people are like, why does everyone like a cartoon about a sad horse? What are we doing? How is that where America is right now? So disappointed in Iowa State, not over. Jaden Higgins, I think I want an NFL. I want to see him play in the NFL. Like now I'm starting to get like, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I kind of want the Las Vegas Raiders to take Shadur Sanders in the first round and Jaden Higgins in the second round, and for them to just tear up the NFL for the next 10 years. I like to think about stuff like that sometimes. Kansas State is more nuts than Iowa State. Iowa State was kind of living on the edge, but they're more like your kid that kind of always tries to do the right thing, and then just like you're just disappointed when they don't quite take care of their business. And then Kansas State is just your wild child. They're just like, I don't know what they're doing.
This is so I was watching this game sort of. Well, I was mostly watching you react to this game than I was actually watching it. K-State outgained Houston 327 to 232. Houston completed 12 passes. There were 12 of 12 for 111 yards and a touchdown, and then averaged 3 yards per carry on 40 carries and won.
Avery Johnson was running backwards 40 yards on every play for Kansas State, I think is what happened there. Okay. So, and it was weird weather, but both these teams, the thing that is like the thing that's weird about Iowa State is like Iowa State drove for the winning score with 2:11 left and then gave up another winning drive. Like that should have been the game-winning drive for Iowa State. They did everything you want a winning team to do, and then their defense just gave it up. And the one thing I wanted to say about Iowa State that I forgot was that they've had all these linebacker injuries and various things on their defense. And Matt Campbell did say it's taken like a toll on everybody in the building that they've been trying to deal with these defensive injuries so much. So I thought that was interesting that everybody knows it. You can't ignore it. but like he was like, yeah, it really is kind of a thing. But that is not what the Kansas State game was, because Kansas State was just ahead 19-10 and started getting goofy. And Avery Johnson threw a pick, and Houston scored on a short field, and then Houston scored again, and then Avery Johnson threw another pick, and then the game was over. So they were up 19-10 in bad weather with 13 minutes left. And then Houston scored twice, and Kansas State kicked a field goal kicked a field goal like on the last play of the third quarter. And then the fourth quarter possessions for Kansas State were interception, punt, interception, end of game. So,
and they were,
that's bad.
Not only that, it was 2 plays interception, 5 plays punt, 3 plays punt, 5 plays interception, and then 7 plays for 47 yards to run out the clock at the end of the game. I don't know. Houston was 3 of 12 on third down. How do you lose this game? Because Avery Johnson was running 40 yards behind the line of scrimmage.
Yeah. So this is the evolution of Avery Johnson. 23 of 39, 238, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions, 8 rushes for 18 yards, because he's running backwards a lot of the time. They don't have a ton of pass catchers. They're so good. They're so good with their quarterback run game and their 2 running backs. And this is back to a thing that we've been talking about all years. Like, as teams try to evolve, is Kansas State evolving past Avery Johnson's current competence? Because when you look at a box score where Avery Johnson is throwing it 39 times and is a non-factor in the run game in the rain, does that make sense to you?
No, it doesn't.
There would be a part of us that says, let's run triple option. And that DJ Giddens and Dylan Edwards were combined 25 for 81 on the ground.
17 for 50 for Giddens is,
That does not compute in a bad weather game where you would think that, like, let's run these 3 guys until Houston stops it. So, and a Houston team that's been very inconsistent and certainly is not, and as you said, did not even put together a lot offensively. So, and that's the second loss for Kansas State. So I had tweeted like, okay, there's a bunch of Big 12 teams with 2 losses now. So really, in the conference, because Colorado has 2 losses, but 1 is to Nebraska, so they only have 1 conference loss. So it's undefeated BYU in the conference, and then Colorado and Iowa State 1 loss each. And then everybody else, there's a bunch of teams in a mix. Cincinnati has 2 losses. Texas Tech has 2 losses in the conference. Kansas State's in that now. So on Wednesday, you and I both put Kansas State in the playoff, and Kansas State is very much not on track for the playoff now.
DJ Giddens in the last 3 games is averaging 3.6 yards per carry. It is a troubling trend for Kansas State. He is far too good of a running back to have that going on.
So this is a great day for Colorado. Colorado is going to have a real opportunity here and get a Colorado BYU Big 12 title game, man. That'd be wild, man.
I'm there. Yeah.
And it has come so far back around on the Colorado story here. Like, Colorado's a real football team. And like, that continues to be a great win for Nebraska. Kansas State was lucky, not lucky, but like, it took everything Kansas State had to win that game at Colorado to give Colorado its only Big 12 loss. Not lucky. That was actually a really good win by Kansas State. That was almost like a program defining win because they hadn't been winning Big 12 road games. But Colorado can hang with anybody in that conference for sure. And then this is one of those, like, everyone I think is still intrigued by what's the bracket going to look like if the ACC and Big 12 champs aren't quite that great. If Colorado gets there, do you want to play Shadur Sanders and Travis Hunter in the playoff?
No. Do I want to play the team that will go into the playoff with maybe the best quarterback in the playoff field? No.
Like, can I start rooting for a Colorado-Georgia playoff game now? Is that okay with everybody? Can we have that be like a 4-5 game? Like, that's what we're talking about here. So, like, this is, like, that could get really fun. But just as a heads up to everybody, the North continues to dominate the Big 12. So
that's right.
It's
that's really all that matters.
It's going to be a Northern.
No matter how it, no matter how it shakes out. Yeah.
Hail to the North. All right. It's a bit of a red wedding, but at least Dabo Sweeney got stabbed too. I'm just kidding. It's just like figurative football stabbing, not real stabbing. So, Dabo, did you watch Game of Thrones? Oh, it's an orange wedding. It was an orange wedding. Oklahoma State lost again. Oklahoma State, the Big 12 is just on its head. Oklahoma State stinks. Oh my gosh, Oklahoma State stinks. Okay. We'll be back with a Monday show. We'll be back with the Tuesday show. We'll be back with the Wednesday show. We'll be back with the Thursday show. We do it Monday through Thursday live at noon Eastern on YouTube for about an hour and a half. We do it every Saturday night at 11 p.m. Eastern for a live post-game show. We drop a betting show on Friday mornings, and we are just excited that you guys are here for the ride with us. So this was a wild weekend, and the North took some blows, but it wasn't only the North. And we're going to find out what the committee thinks of the whole thing on Tuesday, which is like the big thing that's happening this week. Because as everybody knows, the only rankings that really matter are the last ones on the Sunday after conference championship weekend. But the second most important rankings are the first one, because you get an initial peek at what the committee is thinking about, even though they can totally change their minds for no reason later on. But I do think Indiana's going to be higher than they are. I'm really curious to see what they do with BYU. And I think that Ohio State, Georgia hierarchy at the top will also give us a really important read on how they're viewing things. And also like where Notre Dame fits in at 7-1, right? Yeah. With kind of a weird loss, but playing much better lately. All right. Thanks as always to our producer, Mike Yorostowski, for making us look good and sound good. If you hung out with us during the day for the watch along and now you're here again, holy moly, we should send you money. Landis, can you get the names of people? If you watched us combined more than 6 hours today, send a note to Landis and I'll send you like $5. Tell a friend, quarters. Give us a thumb, subscribe. Yeah. But then it's going to cost you extra postage to send it in quarters. It's going to be a pain. So anyway, thanks to you guys for being here. We'll catch you Monday at noon on YouTube. But for now, he's Bill Landis. I'm Doug Lesmerises. And that was KOTN Late Night on Kings of the North.